Let's Talk Tunnelling is produced by XRJV and proudly sponsored by DC Adams Group, Why Safety Matters.
Welcome, this is another episode of Let's Talk Tunnelling. I'm your host, Dallas Adams, and today's guest is Bryan Greenfield. Greenie, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, mate. How are you? How's the family?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Hey, much appreciated you coming on and giving us your time. So when did it all start for you and what was it? And give us a rundown of your career, please.
Okay. Well, it all probably started, we'll go back before I started tunnelling. We were fortunate to be brought up on the those Waikato power stations and that through the years. My old man went through there from Mangakino all the way through to Turangi, and from the early 50s. When we eventually settled in Turangi, we had a place just down the road from where your mum and dad used to live. And looking over to the hill there, it was a grand view out the back of our house. We could see all the work that was going on with Downers there, and the Ministry of Works to their, the Downers Kanu Tunnel and the Ministry of Works, I think, were doing the penstock excavations on the side of the hill there. And to me, it was just amazing. Like, what's all this activity going over there? It sounds like there's a railway line going on. Well, hear all this rail gear going in and out. And I think there's no railway lines around Turangi. And this is the old man explained to me, well, that's the tunnel project going on over there. And then while I was at high school there, a bit further on, that I working at the pub, and I used to do deliveries out to the Katelfa work site out of the what they call the Western Diversions, the Tawhatukuri site, I think it was, out that way. Wanganui Headwaters was being dammed or taken to provide water for that part of the project, which those waters eventually ended up going through the Kanu Tunnel. So that was my first encounter with tunnelling work. But then was until I left school, and then we went to live in Wellington for 3 years, and then things were getting a bit tough down there. And work-wise, the decision had been made to go ahead with the Rangipo project back in about 1973, and they started employing people in administration positions and that sort of thing, and that's what I've been doing in Wellington. And we came back to Turangi and had a good 3 years there on the project. There was still a lot of tunnelling work going on then. There were parts of stage 1 and 2 of the project. And I sort of got an interest then. I thought, what's all this work? And I was out on the Rangipo North site for quite a while as part of our training. And then they were doing the investigation work still then for the Rangipo Underground Power Scheme. So I got to meet a lot of the guys there, and what amazed me is I'd go down there to where the actual investigation drive was and the shaft, and I'd see these guys coming out in the middle of winter after night shift, and they'd be absolutely white, freezing, soaked to the skin, and they'd be coming there, they'd sign the papers, they pick up their pay, and it was just, I think, what do these guys do? How do they do this work? And that's what really got me looking at all this, the underground work that was going on there. Later on, I got to be part of various other committees and that, working contracts there. Kiri Alpha were finishing up their Mauwhanga Tonrero project, and then the Ministry of Works were actually doing the, what was the name of it? Mangaio Tunnel down near Mauwhanga, which is like pretty close to Wairuru. And I got to meet a lot of the guys there as well, so it really started intriguing me, and I sort of started to read up a bit about, what this all involved, and I became really interested in it. And so after about 3 years, the actual Rangipo project kicked off in 1975 for the underground works. So I was out on the site, back on the site again there, and watching these guys start this excavation work for the Rangipo Powerhouse access tunnel. And I was just amazed. And it wasn't just simple, like we are now, going there, put a road header in there and start cutting. These guys were doing it with jack picks, pelican picks, and they're close timbering the roof and that. This is right at the very start, because it was just pumice they're tunnelling through. And it just amazed me that the amount of dedication, the hard work and the sweat these guys were putting in to get this job done. And a lot of these guys, it's at the start of this particular tunnel, they probably more than half of them had never worked underground before. That's how many guys have to man up with that start of the project. And that was just the access tunnel. And then they had a similar amount of men down there working from the bottom of the investigation drive to start the underground excavation. So there was all this, and then another sphere of work was up at the top of the penstock, the surge chamber, and they had a similar number of guys up there. A lot of clean skins, a lot of guys that had come from other projects in New Zealand, like the Kaimai Tunnel, but it just really intrigued me. So I decided, after the project had been going about 12 months, that this is the Rangipo side of it, that I want to get involved. So I said, how do I do this? You can't go from what the position I was doing to become a wage worker. So I pushed, and luckily I had a guy out on site there when I was back out there, the resident engineer on the site by the name of Gary Gay. And he had all these books I was looking through and trying to get a handle on, various methods of excavation and that. But these were mostly American books. So I took them home and had a good read, and thought, this would be fantastic. So I made an effort to try and get to do this sort of work. What also pushed me to try something different was the fact that being in the staff on those projects, there was no real advancement available unless you left and went somewhere else. So this is a great opportunity. And so I went from there, and it was available. I was able to get on crew and start like as a clean skin. Luckily for me, I got to work under some really great old guys there who had been working underground for donkey's years. At that stage, they'd been through all the hard yakka and everything else on a lot of other projects, and that some of the guys I worked with had worked in the old mines up there in Waihi, doing probably conventional mining in those areas before they had jumbos and that sort of thing. And I had the good fortune to work under them, and they were such well-respected guys. They were so easygoing, so really available to pass their knowledge on and just make things easy for you, even though we didn't want to make things too easy, because, we wanted to get in there and do the hard yards. So, that was my introduction, was that. And I loved it. It sort of gave you a focus that I didn't have in what I'm currently doing. You could see the results of what you were doing, and every day you went to work, it was something different, something more challenging. And the guys you were working with, everybody seemed to gel, back then. So yeah, it was a good introduction. 23 years of age, yeah. Oh, I think I was hooked, Dallas. A big thing for me was, in those days I was playing football, right? And I wasn't the fittest bloke around, sitting on a chair all day. It didn't do your fitness any good. And I just, within a matter of like 6 months, being on that airleg every day and doing all sorts of other things, the timbering work, everything else you're doing. If you're working with small drives, you were doing everything by hand. There's not a lot of machinery you could use other than the mucking machinery. You were doing a lot of shovel work, pick work, jack pick work, and guys will tell you that they develop arms like bloody, muscles on their arms like they never thought they had before. And it was only, not only that, it was the good physical, hard work nature of it. Just, it was good for your body, and that's the way I felt back then. So yeah, we could go out to a restaurant, And my brother-in-law at the time, he was working for Cadelpha on concrete works, and we'd sit down and have a great big plate of pasta for an entree, and then have a good big steak and everything else afterwards for the mains. Yeah? It was just fantastic for my health physically. And Cadelpha starting there was a big shock to the town. There's a story, you'll find a few stories there in the history of the place, and that the New Zealand Workers' Union, I think the story goes that they just realised there weren't the men available in New Zealand, the experienced men available to do these jobs. That's why they more or less gave permission to the New Zealand government, bring these guys in because we really need them here. We won't have the experienced people at that point in time. You're going to start the project because there was the big Kaimai project going, the rail tunnel there, and one or two other jobs. And so it was a great thing that they brought the Cadelpha people in. They added such a cultural thing to the town. It welcomed them with open arms. It was so amazing. I was still at school when it happened, when they started coming in, in force there, bringing their families, and that was the good part. It wasn't just single men. They brought the families over. The same as us guys working for Ministry of Works and Downers. The company provided housing, some on site, some in the village, and it was just a great time. Everybody got on well. I don't know there was any friction. Sometimes there was a little bit of drama at the pub, and generally that was through alcohol, that sort of thing, as you get anywhere. But it was just a great introduction to the town, and it just gave us that cultural diversity there. They set up a beautiful restaurant. They had a club there, which everybody was invited to go there. And then, of course, with the way they celebrate things in Santa Barbara Day, it was just it should have been a public holiday for everybody in Turangi, but they made us work. But we found ways and means of getting to those celebrations. So yeah, it was just amazing. And because they're so much alike, New Zealanders and Italians, and I think the local community, lots of single women in the town, and that today there are my sister-in-law. She married an Italian, and they've been living in Italy for the last 40 years. And I can name you probably a dozen more people who New Zealand girls, Turangi girls that married Italians, that are now still happily married in Italy, living over there. It's just a great thing to happen to New Zealand as well as Turangi. Yes, yeah. From my recollection with the Turangi Ringapo scheme, the investigation work started very early. They were still doing the Potu tunnel, still finishing that stage of the. What they need to do in those situations is find out, especially where an underground power station involved, is where the ideal positioning of that power station and all the associated works, or that underground structure, is best suited, because that area of New Zealand, the Central Plateau, just was faulted, dikes, cracks, everything, water, streams, underground water. The ground we struck in so many different places. So that was the idea. So they sunk the shaft, about 100-metre shaft, I think, off the towards the end of the investigation drive. So investigation drive went in about 100 metres. And then they drilled out from there in various directions and that, trying to ascertain things. Then they started sinking the shaft. They had a drill chamber about halfway down, and then they did various core drilling from there in all sorts of directions. And then the bottom of the shaft, they did more core drilling just to probably prove up the best places that they'd been looking at, positions for the underground chamber. And you look into the chamber that was like 20 by 25 by 60 metres long. So the worst thing would be to have that in an area where there's bad ground. So they just got all the positioning right and everything, and that was what the investigation works ascertained is the ideal places for these structures, I think, and also what grounds they're likely, what type of ground geology they're likely to encounter in their tunnelling works. Yeah.
It's interesting. I actually thought my father was a policeman when I found out that he was going down to the Clyde Dam to do some excavation work. So yeah, quite naive as a kid, wasn't I? But at least I was listening back then. But you're dead right. I think what they did down south was sink a 30-metre shaft, and then they come underneath the river foundations for that dam floor, and obviously see what the ground was like. And like the method of tunneling back there was airlegging. So can you explain that process and probably the drill and blast methods?
We my first months there were working out of the excavation of the powerhouse. What time I've got down there, the what they call the abutment drives. That's 2 drives down each side of the powerhouse, because they could only do it in stages, even though I've explained that the rock was, the most ideal they could get. They couldn't excavate the whole powerhouse chamber in one hit. So we were airlegging, because all the excavation was done in airleg. There was no jumbo work that I can remember on any part of the project ever. It was all airleg, due to the nature of the rock and, where we were. Be very unusual to see an 8-foot round fight, anything like that, anywhere from 1.5 to 2 metres, 5 to 6 feet, was about the normal. But my initial work there was, in the power station side of it. What led to that area being excavated was a sort of a convoluted, drawn-out process of driving off the bottom of the investigation shaft, so far virtually along the full length of the bottom of the powerhouse, and then they'd had to rise up from that shaft and conventional raise, drill and blast, and then go out from there across what they call the abutment, or probably the upstream abutment of the power station. And that was only about probably 4 or 5 metres by about 4 or 5 metres high. So, and then that was set up your air legs and two drills, 2 air legs, drill out, fire, and muck out. But generally, we only had a little IMCO 12-shot slingshot type thing. We had to support, and because we weren't using sets or anything like that in that area, it was all roof bolts. So the roof bolts all had to be done by hand, and generally we'd do this top and the top of the side, because you're looking at a sort of half an arch there, and we're doing 6 metre and 9 metre roof bolts on a 1 metre by 1 metre pattern, and they all had to be grouted. They're all placed by hand, grouted. They were like 3 metres length, and you'd join them together with a sleeve, and put them up the hole. They had a hole up the middle, and that's how we grouted them. They made a hand pack with a cement and grout, and made a grout thing, hand packed them, tensioned them up, and then grouted. Once that was done, we'd have to drill the top of the face off the muck pile. So everything was done with, the bolts were done with either a stoper or an air leg, 9 metres and 6 metres, so that put a hell of a strain on the equipment we were using. Drill out the top, and then we'd start mucking out. And it could take up to 2 shifts to muck out. You could only do it like one little skip at a time. And as I said, we'd push it up to where this rise was made, and they'd tip the skip over there. It'd go down to the bottom of that shaft with a rise. We had another mucker operating down below at the bottom of the rise to pick the dirt up, put in another skip, and that went along to the bottom of the investigation shaft, tipped it into another skip there, and it was hauled to the surface. And then it was tipped out there into another skip and pushed out to the tip head. So it was quite a long, drawn-out process till we could get access up from the bottom of the, once the access tunnel coming from the opposite direction got down to that area where the power station was being constructed. So this took, crikey, probably about 8-12 months before we're in that situation. So we drove across the abutments on both sides, across the power station in the middle, and we come back and did the crown. We sort of put an inclined drivage up to where the crown of the power station was, the middle of the crown, and we were doing the same sort of thing there, airleg, drill and blast, and then you had a set pattern of bolts to do. I think in the crown, like every half metre, there was a 9-metre bolt in that part of the crown, a metre every metre. So it was just hard work. Very, we weren't able to get a front end load or anything like that down there. And then we got to the stage where we eventually got all the most 90% of the top of the power station excavated, and then they rose up from down the access tunnel, and we were able to eventually get a machine up there to help with it and speed the mucking up process. Otherwise, yeah, we'd drill, we'd blast, bolt off the muck pile, and you can imagine what that's like, with a stoper especially, and an airleg, and it was hard work. Go up there, drag it all up, drag it all back, and then buck out, drill the bottom out again, and shoot. So loading the top off ladders. So yeah, it was very, very long process. But it was the best we could do then. We, the sort of equipment we had, well, it did the job. We weren't breaking any records, but it did the job, and we got there. Once we got to that stage there and could get bigger equipment up and start the benching up process, then we were sort of well underway for that side of it. But with that, having said that, there was stages you sort of had to pull up, because there was then the benching down process went in stages. They still had to concrete the roof of the crown of the power station, and just going back to when I said before, when they started the crews up, they had a lot of inexperienced guys. They had a lot of carpenters they put on in the tunnelling crews, and when they knew that when time came to do these lining works in the power station and also the downscrew surge chain, they would go back on the tools, and this is what happened. They needed it's about the time I was sort of brought on as a trainee tunneler, and they knew at some stage they're going to lose a lot of guys to go into the civil works, and yeah.
Just one question then. So drill, charge, fire, bolt off your muck pile. Once it's been fired, the dirt's sitting there, then you actually get up onto the heap of dirt to bolt up your roof, and then you muck out, and then it's another round again. Yeah. You don't spray shotcrete?
No, there's no shotcrete then on that part of it, because shotcrete then was in its infancy. We did actually do some shotcrete on the project, but later on, like probably about 2 years later, we experimented. We've been doing drainage drives between the two caverns and around them, and out, when I say around them, with the full length, probably on the upstream side of the power station, and then around behind the valve chamber area. If you can visualise, these are just 3 different chambers. Very, very wet areas, and hence the name drainage drives. Well, so they decided we'll try some shotcreting, but in those days they were experimenting with the dry spraying method, much the same as what you use in the coal mines and that sort of thing. Dry spray and mix at the nozzle. Okay. The accelerating agent they were using then was a chemical called tricosol. And spray, it'd mix in the in the lever rig, the mini Mako, whatever you want to call it. 20-30 metres of hose and 2-inch pipe, and spraying a very small aggregate, mixing in with it. And what used to happen was it just wear the pipes out. And the other bad thing too was that they proved that this tricosol was not very good for your health. So, to put it mildly, but it would go off almost instantaneously as soon as the water went in and hit the walls. Within a couple of minutes, it was solid. We've done all the excavation to this level, right? Virtually spring level, line level in the power station, and we had to set pads up either side with rails on, so the concrete formwork could travel along, and they'd do it in stages. They did that same in the power station and also the downstream research chamber. They just do it a pour of about 3 metres, bulkhead it off, pour, and then move it. It was the same for the sides of the chambers. It was all concreted all the way. That was the nature of the rock. It was, and using rock bolts. I mean, you've probably seen photographs of Manapuri where it's just rock, just the exposed rock, because there was different sort of geology there that they encountered, and we weren't that fortunate. Yeah.
Man, like you say, it was very physical work then back then, I suppose, and that's how it was, and that's all you knew.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, very physical. Yeah, like I say, that was, anybody who's worked on drill and blast and then had to drill the next round off the muck pile because you don't have a jumbo any sort down there. Holding the air leg down to the muck pile while you're drilling the face or drilling the bolts, and it's not so bad the roof bolting. You're using a stoper, which is just straight down into the muck pile. You've got to have something there to stop the leg going down into the dirt. So yeah, but it was just the nature of it. You got used to it, and you just did everything you could to make it easier for yourself. So yeah. So,
The other thing I remember listening or hearing about, and I think I probably went there as a kid, was the rock drill comps in Turangi. What were they like?
Oh, great fun, mate. Yeah, I was fortunate. I've been underground about 8-10 months, and when I first, going back to when I first started, it was hard. It was hard to get on that airleg. College wouldn't let you on it. So I eventually got on it. I'd sneak away at crib time and say, "Oh, that's what it was like." Hey, no, that was it was sacrilege to get on there and not those guys. They were first and best dressed on there. I would go up there and I'd set it all up anyway. That was my job, and I'd start drilling. And that's how I eventually got in there and start drilling and that while I was still having crib, and they'd come back and I'd already done half a round sort of thing. So yeah, but getting back to the drilling competitions, well, it was a great day. It was always a great turnout because we had so many guys there. When they first started, I think it was in 78. I've been underground for about 10 months, and it was fun. It was fun. Everybody got together. You all told lies, and the dirt was piling up everywhere. And Atlas Copco, they put on a grog tent for us, hey? And, unfortunately, the kids got ignored, and we'd be all in there. And throughout the day, and they'd have the preliminaries, the drill offs, and that against the two blokes that drill off at the same time. And I've still got some amazing photos. And then the best time, they'd sort that out. The 8 best times to go through to the semi-finals or the quarterfinals. And then there was elimination from then on. So anyway, you have to have a couple of stands. Okay, you make up these stands that you can anchor down that hold a cylindrical 2-foot long, say 6-inch, 150mm diameter concrete block. So you drop this into the stand, which is at about chest height, where the concrete block is held, and then you drill through it. You have it's got a ladder sort of attached to the stand, so you go down there. You're on the timer. You get a whistle. Go. You pick the drill up, an air leg, collar your hole, and drill through. The fastest bloke wins out of that, And then because you're all being timed.
Yeah. So you're trying to simulate an actual drilling a hole at the face, aren't you? So it's almost it's like you're you're in a hurry to drill a hole out before your next mate's drilling his next to you. So you're actually in a bit of a competition. So it's a game. Like it's you versus someone else.
That's
to
it.
drill. How long's the hole? 6 foot? Did you say?
Oh, about 600 mil. 2 foot.
Oh,
They're 2 foot. So you've got a 2 foot steel, 2'6" starter steel, mudhead steel generally, and there's a plate, usually a flapper plate on the back of the piece that holds the concrete cylinder. As soon as that clacks, as soon as they hear the drill steel hitting that's when people time you click the stopwatch. So, and that was it. So you just do that, and that was the first. You might have. I think the first time they ran it, there was about 90 guys. It was just amazing. And then, later in the afternoon, you got down to the final 8, and the final 8 was you had to do the starter steel, then you had to change over to a 5 foot steel, and that also meant moving your air leg back again, and then drill through to the through the block. So you had to be very accurate. You had to anchor in the
yeah. So when you got to the pre or the heats, they'll just go, right, you go against old mate, and away you go, and whoever won that would move up like a ladder system, like any ladder system. So it's almost like wood chopping, but you're actually using an air leg drill. You've got everything set up. So you grab this air leg, you lift it up, and then you collar a hole. So when you say collar a hole, you actually start drilling into a concrete block.
Yep.
And then you got to go through that concrete block dead straight to hit this back plate.
Yep.
So once you hit the back plate, you've won. First one to get it.
Well, that's
you
it.
and your mate.
Yeah.
And then you start moving up.
No. It was based on time. So even though you might have beat your mate, it only took the 8 fastest times out of everybody. Yeah. So otherwise you'd have been there all day. So the 8 fastest times went into the next round, and then it was elimination. So so then you had final 4, and final 2, and for the final 2 for the final. So
any serious fellas didn't go to the old beer tent? They went out the back for a stretch up and ready to go.
Can't remember. No. Free beers, free beer. So
wow,
talking about beer.
Far out. What a good idea.
It was great. Myself, I managed to get in the finals 3 times in 3 years. So but some of the guys,
it'll be technique as well, eh? It's not all about muscle and grunt, eh?
That's right.
Pretty technical.
It's about technique, because even though the air leg's a heavy thing in the jackhammer, I've seen some small guys, and one of the guys, one of the smallest blokes you ever seen tunnelling, a bloke by the name of Jock Church, he could pick it up like it was just nothing, and it's just about technique, how to let the air leg help you do the work, because you pulled it up and you pulled it back. You didn't lift it, so you pulled it up, pulled back, and that way you're sort of pivoting on the air leg. You went grabbing the full weight of the jackhammer. So it's just a technique, and then let it go forward, and you're holding it there to collar it, and using your body, your legs, mainly your legs. You wouldn't want to use your back, because your back, it was all. It comes down to technique, and then when you went, if you're in the final 8 and you had to do the steel changeover, it's the same again. It was how to use your body, put the leg in the right place, using your body, using your legs, and then getting that stretch up and dropping it in the same hole you'd started your 2 foot steel in, and then go from there. And just there's a lot of guys used to make it look hard, but day after day, every shift, you were on that air leg every day. It just made, you got used to it. It just seemed to be a natural extension of your body after a while. Some guys would say, "Oh, geez, get that thing throbbing between your legs." It was great. Well, it was. It's the sort of feeling it gave a lot of us. Is that once you're on that air leg, in some ways it was like having a rest. because you weren't doing the other hard jack there, because you let the air leg do all the work. The only time was the drama was generally when you were doing the top holes and you had to have a bit of reach. And then you had to sort of put a bit of weight on to hold it down because it didn't have the air leg set right. It could get away on you. Seen that, guys will tell you it's happened many times. Even the best of guys just didn't have the air leg in the right place, and it's got away on them, pushed the jackhammer out of there, lost control. But there's a lot of, just getting back to the jackhammer itself, there's a lot of skill involved. Not so much when you're in just rock section. As the guys will tell you, when you're in sets, what you want to try and make, try and achieve is as little overbreak as possible. So it's especially hard when you're in sets because you've got the set that's coming down below the spring, down the A line, and you've got to angle your drill steel up and out to the side. What you don't want to do is create too little excavation where you've got to get back in there with a jack and cut it out and slow everything down, or too much excavation where you've got to overbreak and you've got to timber up more than you wanted to, and then slow things down as well. So there was an art to it. It was a challenge, but it was it's just what we did. You just tried to make things as easier for you as possible. Especially the drilling blast, you want to be accurate. Say the guys when you're in rock section with you're putting bolts up instead of sets, it's not so important, but you still want to try and keep that excavation as close to the excavation line as possible. I'm talking about A line, B lines, that sort of thing. So that was the it's okay to be able to use the air leg, but to use it accurately in those situations, bearing in mind what sort of rock you were in as well. Sort of took all that into account when you're drilling blast. If you knew, we're in pretty fractured ground here, so you had to make allowances for that, knowing full well if you drilled how you normally drill it in a good, more or less competent ground, it would break to exactly to the drill hole. But in fractured ground, it might break further. And that's where you're trying to avoid too much overbreak, too much timber, blah, blah, longer to do the cycle.
Far out. Listening to that, no wonder you fellas hung around for so long, eh? It's bloody tunneling's easy now. What we've got to do.
With that particular project, we didn't only have the straight drivages, we had vertical drivages, we had incline drivages, we had... I did a bit of bore drilling work there. We had 2 Alimac raises to do on the project. There were the 2 stages of the vertical penstock. And what we did to sort of facilitate the excavation of those 2 shafts, raises, we drilled pilot holes down for them, and each 4-inch diameter pilot holes, and they would be part of our cut, what we call the cut and the drill and blast. And it was a very good idea. The only thing was that the areas we were doing these the penstocks in were very wet, so we had enormous amounts of water coming in while we're doing these Alimac rises. But with the Alimac, we'd set up a platform, and it was a fully self-contained platform, ran on rails, carried 2 stopers on it in your drilling gear, had a cage underneath, ran off compressed air motor, would run it up these rails. The rails we bolted to the sides of the raise. The rails contained your air and water, compressed air and water. So they were really specialised type of rail. They bolted together in like 5 foot 2 metre sections. And it'd come down, we'd go up, we'd drill out, 2 of us, We drill out there around, load up, because we carried our explosives up with us, and load up and come back down, running out your firing cable as you came down, and parked it up underneath, out of the way, shot, fired it, and then it'll get mucked out, and we go up and do it again. We do that twice in a shift. But as I say, with these pilot holes we drilled down for them, they've just created so much water. We'd only work 6-hour shift because we'd get so wet. There was waterproof gear was just not just didn't keep you dry. So we go up, shoot twice we'd do that, come down, go home. So that was just another part of what we did there. Some of the the drives we were doing, especially the penstock drives, we encountered a lot of like they did at Downers and Kadalfa, the tunnels they did there. They experienced as well unbelievable working conditions, rock conditions, soft rock, water inflows like you'd never dream of seeing in tunnels, and causing all sorts of dramas. The experience of the people running those projects and the guys that were working on them were credit to the job as a whole, because they, everybody knew how to deal with those things. And, over time, the experience you gained there stood you in high regard for any other time you struck conditions like that, especially when it came to water and wet conditions that were just atrocious. You weren't even drill and blast. You sometimes just jackpick, pilot driving, jackpick, water. Sometimes we'd be driving in steel over the top of the pilot drive with an airleg and jackhammer with a special bracket on, because just to try and catch the roof, much the same as we do canopy tubes now, if you can imagine that. We have a little drive 7x5, hammering this bloody steel through big bars and channel iron, catch the roof, jackpick it out, and then you get so far and pull up, and then you'd bring the sides of the top heading of the tunnel up, and that was all jackpick again. And it was just a stage that took ages, but you had to do it. It's the only way you could get through. Fortunately with us on the Ministry of Works, we didn't have on that project, we didn't have great lengths of time or delays through it. But I mean, Kadalfa on the Mofunga Tongariro Tunnel, they encountered such terrible conditions. Downers on both the Takanu Tunnel and the Tarace Tunnel struck incredibly bad conditions like that. And I think there's one stage there you look in the book there, the Tarace Tunnel, they got about 300 metres in 1 year. So they persevered. They knew the job had to get done. And with Downers in the Tarace Tunnel, they had the option there. Once the downstream surge chamber had been completed, they could come around there and excavate from the opposite end for the Tarace Tunnel. And that's when I first met Manu Winitana there. We were on the same shift. So we had so much, what I liked about that job and the diversity and the of work we had as part of the power station crews, and that the amount of different jobs we're doing there to complete that project. One of the more technical parts was the crane beam, and it was an enjoyable part of the job for me to do. Once we'd excavated once the roof of the power station had been completely concreted, the next stage of excavation took us down below the level of the crane beam. So down each side of the power station, they had to create this humongous, I suppose it'd be like 100-ton capacity travelling crane, to be installed as part of the final works. And the crane beam was the fantastic amount of work that went in to create this beam that came out from the walls about 2 or 3 metres, and then sort of at a 45-degree angle down to the wall again. And the crane beam had to have these special 18-metre anchors put in there, 6-inch, or I think they were 4-inch anchors, flexible anchors, rock anchors. And it was just the amount of work that went into drilling these anchors So we had to we got on that part of the project. Well, there was, excavation had to pull up while we did all this. Drill them out like a 2-inch hole to start with, drill the grout out, widen it out to 6 inches, 150 mil, 18 metres, pressure grout that, drill the grout out again, and then they'd come and install the anchors. It was just, and I can't remember how many there were. There probably been about 20 down each side of the powerhouse chamber. So to carry the high capacity crane that was going to be used for installing the turbines and all those sorts of things there at the end. So, but yeah, we're lucky to work with so many knowledgeable guys, and for a lot of them, I worked with quite a few guys that worked at Manapuri back then. I mean, most of them are gone now, rest their souls, but they just knew because of this, they worked on similar projects elsewhere. I worked with guys that worked on the Snowy over here in Australia, and they'd come over to New Zealand, and they're just so good to talk to impart their knowledge. They did help you out and just make it interesting. He says, "Oh, we're going to do this now. We're going to do this next week. We'll be doing this and that." And as I said, the variety of work there made it so interesting, and an engineering marvel for New Zealand. I think I always thought anyway. Having been so lucky to work on a project of that nature, I'm not taking it away from the guys who are working in the straight tunnels or the main tunnels, but I think I was really pleased to be able to get so much experience on other sorts of excavation, and it's sort of that knowledge was stuck with me. Different methods of excavation, struck all the different sorts of ground, and in different situations of excavation where it made things really interesting. So yeah.
What you must have come across some pretty bad shit though, like obviously back in those days.
Yeah, we used to do things timbering wise in New Zealand. I think they call it the American system of timbering up in straight tunnels and that, when you're in steel sets and timber. Andy talked about laths and that sort of thing. Our system in New Zealand was you drilled, you fired, and you went and timbered up straight away. So you caught the roof. So you'd cantilever your timber laths out and hold the roof. You'd go right up to the roof and wedge your timber up so you actually caught the roof. And then you'd muck out. You do that all around, depending on whether you had close timbered or skin to skin or hit and miss and that sort of thing he talked about. And you come down to spring line, wherever the top of the muck pile was, and then you went and mucked out. And then you stood the set. So when I come to Australia, when I was the first drill and blast tunnel striking those conditions over here, I was amazed to see it was different. They'd drill, blast, muck out, stand the set, timber up. So which meant you were, more or less working under unsupported roof, even though you're in sets, which means you're in pretty bad roof conditions if you're in sets. So that was the difference. It was a bit hard to sort of grasp for me in my first tunnel in Australia. So yeah, but that was the way they did things, and we made sure we were fine. Well, I suppose you could say a volatile area. We were in that area in New Zealand. It's the Central Plateau, a lot of volcanic activity around there. Down has struck, hot squeezing ground in their first tunnel there. Faults everywhere, water ingress, crushed rock, pressures on sets that would bend them and crush what you wouldn't believe. Sets of 10 by 10 steel RSJs just crushed. And even though you thought you might have been in a small tunnel, putting up a small set, like 100 by 150 by 100, you could still encounter the same conditions in an 8 by 4 tunnel. So that's feet. unbelievable. We had a couple of collapses there at the back of the power station valve chamber under similar conditions. It's just by the weight of rock and going through some bad ground caused these problems. And, you know, that's okay. You think, well, no, you've got to get back and tunnel through that again. So you solidify the area and go back in, tunnel through it again, because you had to put this drive in there. So it was just what you struck, and you just thought that, well, that's what we're going to do. We've got to get through there, yeah.
Wow. What a feeling, though, eh? Knowing, wow, that would have been exciting, I suppose, for a lot of people. I know Dad used to talk about it, and yeah, like you said, you just get through it.
Yeah. Well, one of the last jobs we did there, and I think your dad was on there too, was the Waihohonu Tunnel. And we were at that stage, we'd finished we'd done enough there to move on to the next project from the power station. And the Waihohonu Tunnel brought water from the Waihohonu stream, which is like halfway down the desert road, to the Tongariro River. And the upfall there is just upstream from where the Kiriawha's Mauwhanga Tongariro outfall is. And then down from there is the drop shaft for the Rangipo Hebras tunnel. But the different geology we struck in there was just amazing. It was a 900-metre tunnel, 800 to 900 metres. And I was working there with Bob Techie, and I was on his crew then. And we'd gone in a couple hundred metres with using a loader to load out with, and then we decided to put the rails in and that. And during the excavation, we come across these different geological formations that were part of the old, ancient, hundreds of millions of years old, I suppose, lava flows. And when they were hot, it's fine. When they crystallised and cooled down, they'd form these columnar, hexagonal shapes. It was just amazing, just vertical columnar, hexagonal shapes, about that wide, and all sort of interlinked. If you can imagine the hexagonal and all joined together, and mud in between them, so it made very difficult drilling blasts. So, yeah. But it was just amazing seeing this stuff, volcanic activity from millions of years ago, and it was us going through something different to the normal grey wacky argillite stuff we'd find. So so it was it. So we got probably a third of the way through that tunnel, and we made the big decision. That's it. We're leaving New Zealand, come over to Australia. So that was the next stage of my career. Myself, Bob Techie, and another bloke, Maury Anderson. Our families, we all got convinced by our overseer at the time, along with another couple of guys that were working with us, Phil Aiken and Glenn Henderson. Australia's the place to go. So we all made the big decision, let's go to Australia. So we ended up here back in January 1981.